The idea of celebrating a birthday feels so natural today, yet its origins are far older than many suspect. Ancient Greece, a civilization known for philosophy, architecture, and democracy, also left intriguing traces of how people marked the passage of time in their personal lives. But did they celebrate the day of their birth as we do now? Or was the tradition entirely different? Some evidence suggests links to gods themselves. Others hint at private rituals that few modern people would recognize. Could birthday celebrations as we know them have started here? Or does the truth reveal an entirely alien practice lost in translation? To understand how birthdays fit into Greek life, we first need to see the world they lived in. Ancient Greece flourished between roughly the 8th century BC and the 4th century BC, spreading across the Mediterranean from mainland city-states like Athens and Sparta to islands and coastal colonies. Central to Greek identity was religion and ritual, with dozens of gods and goddesses shaping nearly every aspect of daily existence. Festivals, sacrifices, and offerings marked the calendar year. Private life, too, was punctuated by practices tied closely to the gods. With this in mind, scholars have long asked, how did ordinary Athenians, Spartans, or island dwellers mark the day they themselves were born? Understanding birthdays in ancient Greece requires first looking at how divinity itself was honored. The Greeks believed in the importance of observing sacred days tied to gods and goddesses. Each deity had festivals, sacred anniversaries, and specific rituals. Some sources suggest that individuals, instead of marking their own nativity, focused on honoring the day of birth of a god. For example, Artemis, the goddess associated with childbirth and the moon, had offerings made on certain days of every month. Historians believe these deity-linked observances may have been precursors to personal birthdays, shifting emphasis from divine to human life over the centuries. The Greeks measured time by lunar months, rather than by the solar calendar we use today, and this influenced birthday observances. Each month consisted of 3 distinct phases tied to the waxing and waning of the moon. People placed importance not just on monthly festivals, but also on the day of the month on which they were born. Evidence tells us that individuals often marked the monthly return of the birth moon day with small offerings or quiet acknowledgement, a practice more aligned with ritual than with joyful celebration. This suggests that birthdays were less about personal festivity and more about maintaining cosmic order and continuity. One of the most intriguing connections between ancient Greece and modern birthday customs centers on the practice of candles. Worshippers of Artemis reportedly presented round honey cakes adorned with lit candles at her temple. The flames symbolized the glowing moon, while the act of blowing them out may have been tied to releasing prayers or wishes into the divine realm. Historians argue that this could be the earliest root of our familiar birthday cake ritual. Yet, in its original form, it was not about personal indulgence, but devotion to the goddess. This practice underscores how easily sacred ritual could transform into private tradition over time. There is evidence that recognition of birthdays varied by gender and status. Greek men, particularly those of citizen families, appear in surviving records celebrating their genethlia, a word connected to birth anniversaries. Women's lives, heavily intertwined with domestic and religious roles, were less often documented in this regard, but childbirth and female fertility carried links to goddesses like Artemis and Eileithyia, patron of labor. Therefore, while elite men might have feasts or social gatherings in honor of their birth date, women's connection to birthdays seems to have been framed through the collective rituals of family and community rather than individual celebration. A key feature of Greek culture was the tension between public festivals and private rituals. Grand citywide festivals such as the Dionysia, honoring Dionysus, or the Panathenaia, dedicated to Athena, defined civic identity. In contrast, birthdays, when they did occur, were relatively modest, private affairs. Families might sacrifice small animals or give offerings of food and drink to household gods. Wealthier families could host banquets where guests dined, recited poetry, and poured wine. In both cases, the emphasis rested less on personal vanity and more on continuing the chain of tradition binding family, community, and gods together. Children's birthdays carried even greater significance in the ancient Greek world. Many children did not survive past infancy, and survival through the first few years was a momentous milestone. Families often held small observances, offering prayers and giving thanks for a child's continued life. Archaeological findings of toys and miniature objects in graves show how childhood was viewed with fragility, but also reverence. For boys, the completion of certain ages marked stages of civic identity, ultimately leading to rites of passage into adulthood. These associations with age milestones highlight how the Greeks may have approached birthdays not as annual indulgences, but as markers of survival and personal growth. Greek writers left us glimpses of how birthdays were perceived in intellectual circles. Poets sometimes referenced birthday feasts, implying a tradition of gathering companions and enjoying meals. Philosophers, however, often took more critical stances. Plato, for example, emphasized the idea of celebrating the soul's rebirth into higher understanding rather than fixating on the body's physical birthday. Such perspectives reveal that while some embrace personal celebrations, others question their meaning, preferring to honor ideas of knowledge and virtue over the passage of biological years. Historians often compare Greek traditions with those of neighboring cultures to better understand what was unique or shared. In Egypt, pharaohs observed birthdays tied to divine status. In Rome, both gods and mortals received birthday honors, complete with banquets and offerings to household spirits. Evidence suggests the Greeks stood somewhere in between, deeply focused on the divinity of birthdays for gods, yet gradually adopting more personalized human observances. Over time, as Greek culture influenced Rome, the idea of personal birthday celebrations grew more familiar, eventually becoming a widespread tradition in Roman society and beyond. One of the greatest challenges in studying Greek birthday traditions is the scattered state of the sources. Archaeological evidence is sparse, inscriptions are incomplete, and surviving literature offers only brief references. This means that scholars must reconstruct an incomplete picture from fragments. What emerges is a pattern of variability. Elite men may have celebrated more often, women and children less so. Some communities marked lunar days of birth faithfully, while others folded the observances into larger religious frameworks. The lack of a standardized tradition itself tells us much about the flexibility of Greek religious and cultural life. Today, when candles are lit on a cake and wishes are made in secret, few realize that echoes of ancient Greek rituals may linger in our modern customs. What began as devotion to the gods of the moon and childbirth transformed over centuries into the personal joy of marking one's own life. Historians believe the Greek emphasis on lunar cycles, offerings, and symbolic candles played a role in shaping later traditions in Rome, and by extension, in Western culture more broadly. The ancient Greeks may not have thrown birthday parties in the way we do now, but their rituals of remembrance, offerings, and acknowledgement of the passing year planted seeds of a practice that endures across the globe today.